One of the best things about collecting retro video games that are 20 to 30 years old is finding those gems that you never played as a kid. Finding those games that just kind of stand out and you fall in love with. For me, that's only really happened maybe 2 or 3 times. Ninja Gaiden and Super C are 2 examples of games that I really fell in love with. Sure, there were plenty of other games that I really liked that I hadn't played as a kid, but nothing that kind of jumped out and screamed, "Hey, you have to play this 37 times!" Soul Blazer is one of those games for me. I didn't even know of its existence during the early 90s, and only first played it through emulation 10 years ago or so. At the time, for whatever reason, I didn't really feel it. It seemed cool enough, but I just wasn't interested. Sometime last year, I went ahead and picked it up at my local game store at a decent price. I figured I should give it another chance since I really love Quintet's other games, ActRaiser and Illusion of Gaia. And the game sat on my shelf collecting dust. And if you know anything about my views of collecting retro video games, you know that I collect games that I will eventually play. I always buy a game with the intention of playing it. And while Soul Blazer sat on my shelf for quite a while, I knew it was eventually going to get played. And once I did play it, it was probably one of the best action-adventure RPGs that I'd ever played, and I just fell in love with it. Soul Blazer was initially released as Soul Blader in Japan in early 1992. It was released later that year in North America as Soul Blazer. Yada yada, part of a loose trilogy of Quintet games featuring Illusion of Gaia and Terranigma. Look it up, I'm not going into it. In Soul Blazer, the world has been stripped of all life forms by the devilish being Death Toll, who is summoned by the greedy king Magrid. Magrid forced Dr. Leo to build a machine that was capable of summoning Death Toll. Death Toll agreed to give King Magrid wealth in exchange for each soul on the planet. What Magrid didn't foresee was Death Toll taking his soul as well. Whoops! The game takes place after everything is already gone. You take control of the heavenly being known as Blazer, the companion of the Master, or God, whatever. Blazer's quest is to reclaim the soul of the people, animals, plants, doors, chests of drawers, and statues from various monster lairs scattered throughout dungeons and other dangerous areas. The rest of the story is mostly told through NPC dialogue. Some claim it's pretty interesting stuff, and while I don't really disagree, it's nowhere near the most compelling story told on a 16-bit platform. The story ramps up a lot near the very end of the game, but, whatever. It's there, it's alright, nothing really to write an entire review on. The graphics of Soul Blazer are so-so. I mean, there isn't anything offensive on screen, everything from the backgrounds of the buildings to the characters and enemies look decent and colorful, but they really are a far cry from other games that were released on the system in the same year. Honestly, they're just okay, and that's fine. The music is also decent. It's pretty upbeat for a game set in a world where literally everyone was killed by the devil, but it honestly doesn't ever seem inappropriate. It's just kind of disappointing that it wasn't nearly as epic as, say, ActRaiser, which Quintet released just a year earlier. But I did end up catching myself humming the tunes after my playthrough, so there is that. The game sounds good. It's just not on the same level as others in the SNES library. And of course, there's the gameplay. Soul Blazer is a top-down action-adventure type game. I'd almost say it's more of a dungeon crawler than anything. There are 6 major areas that Blazer sets out to rebuild and revitalize. A village, a forest filled with animals, an underwater palace of mermaids, a mountain cavern where little strange people reside, Dr. Leo's laboratory, and King Magrid's castle. In each area, you adventure into dangerous zones where monsters make their home, and with each monster lair destroyed, you unleash a soul or open a new path through the dungeon. Combat works relatively well. While Blazer's controls are a little loose, leading to a lot of unintentional damage, it's still pretty dang satisfying to fight and kill all the monsters on the map. Throughout the journey, you'll collect new and more powerful weapons and armor, and various spells that do damage in different and creative ways. Spells are a bit awkward to use as they are all launched from a rotating, glimmering light that circles Blazer, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. The 4-way light arrow shot is probably the most useful. Each spell takes gems to cast. These gems are dropped by nearly every enemy. You're never really hard-pressed to find gems to use, as they are found almost everywhere. When you die, Blazer loses all his gems. There are items that help mitigate this, but I honestly kind of stopped relying on them late in the game, instead choosing to use my spells sparingly and just charging in sword swinging in most situations. The bosses in Soul Blazer all have their patterns, and it took me a few times to figure out the best way to tackle each, but eventually I was able to kill each of them pretty easily after the first or second attempt. You can't use spells on these guys though, which is a bit of an interesting decision on the developer's part, but it's not a gripe. The good thing is that when you die from these boss attempts, or really at any point throughout the game, you spawn right back in the Master's Room for whatever area you were in, and traversing back to where you died is never a huge hassle, because enemies tied to monster layers stay dead, and you are able to open up 2 separate warp tiles that take you back to the Master's Room throughout each area, giving you somewhat of a shortcut. No live system, so there aren't any game overs. The monster lair mechanic is what made me fall in love with this game. Defeating a lair of monsters always yields some kind of instant reward, so it got pretty addicting to see what would be unleashed next. I found myself staying up a bit too late every night I started playing this, because I just wanted to keep pushing through the dungeons. Saving after each monster lair destroyed is also possible, so if you want to run through the game in quick bite-sized sessions, it's possible, if you can tear yourself away. I really enjoyed the fact that Soul Blazer is kind of a shortish game for an action-adventure RPG. It only took me a few days to finish it, and as a busy adult, having a whole game experience without needing to invest a ton of time is really awesome. The brevity of the game also means I'll be more likely to come back and play it again in the future, knowing I won't have to sacrifice all that time to play through it. And I know I said look it up on the Quintet Trilogy thing, but I did want to point out a couple of things that I noticed that carried over into Illusion of Gaia from Soul Blazer. Now, I haven't played Terranigma at all, so I don't really know what happens going that far into the trilogy yet, but I did want to look at a couple of cool little things that I found. Gems look like dark gems in Illusion of Gaia and can be pulled to the player using the trigger buttons. Turbo the dog. The ability to pause the game and see how many enemies or monster layers are remaining in the area. The Moon Tribe, Kulukuku or whatever. These little ball monsters. They're much bigger in Gaia, but they behave the same way. This soldier and this maid do the same thing that this man and woman do in Illusion of Gaia. The skeleton enemies that rise from the ground in Soul Blazer are seen again in Illusion of Gaia, but they don't come to life. They just reuse the sprite resource for corpses. The final boss is fought using a Firebird or Phoenix-type weapon in both games. The first boss in Soul Blazer shows up in Illusion of Gaia in a bonus stage. And I'm sure there's others, but those are the ones that I saw. So bottom line is, Soul Blazer is incredibly fun. It may not stand up to some of the other greats on the SNES in terms of story, graphics, and sound, but the gameplay is so addicting that it doesn't really matter. It still looks good. It's not an ugly game. The music's not bad. The story's not terrible. It's just, they're all kind of mediocre. But the gameplay just really makes the game. So I implore any action-adventure fan to go ahead and give Soul Blazer a look. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Later.